Chapter 7, Section 3, Worksheet, Homework, Presentation. During the first 3 years of fighting the war, they were trying to achieve the northern goal of cutting off New England from the rest of the colonies, and they were closer to doing it than they were when the war started. So they decided to move the war to the south. The problem was they didn't have enough troops to control the north, and believed most Southerners were loyalists. So they felt by switching to the south, they'd have a better chance of winning the war. They expected also enslaved Southerners to escape and join the British troops because of Lord Dunmore's proclamation that said anybody that helped the British, if you were a slave, you would be set free after the war. So December 1778, the British captured the port of Savannah, Georgia, and they conquered most of Georgia. And in 1780, the British were led by General Henry Clinton through South Carolina, and they trapped American forces in Charlestown. Now it's Charleston. The Battle of Charlestown was the worst defeat in the American Revolution in the South. They lost their entire Southern army, and it ended when the city ended up surrendering to the British. So it was a major defeat for the colonists. After the Southern Army was defeated, Congress created a new army, and they assigned General Horatio Gates to form a new Southern Army. He is also familiar, if you remember him, he was the one that was the general during the Battle of Saratoga, which was the turning point of the war. He ended up taking Continental soldiers and mixed them with untrained militia. His soldiers were led by Baron de Kalb. That was the corps. And like I said, he also had a lot of militia, untrained militia, in his army. He was in no condition to fight. He was out of supplies, half starved, but he still decided to attack the British at the Battle of Camden. This is one of the 3 C's. The 3 C's are Charleston, Camden, and Cowpens. Gates put the inexperienced militia along part of the front line instead of behind the veterans. The militia panicked and ran. Gates also fled. DeKalb remained with the soldiers and received fatal wounds. So DeKalb is going to die. Gates is going to flee. And Gates is fired as head of the army. So Horatio Gates gets fired after the Battle of Camden. American spirits fell to a new low. The British, though, were having a hard time controlling the South, the countryside, because they lacked troops and supplies. The British win a number of small victories but cannot pacify the countryside. They're not going to be able to control the entire countryside in the South, even though they just won the Battle of Charleston and the Battle of Camden, because they can't control the supply lines. They can control the port cities, but they can't control anything 30 miles inside the country because of lack of supplies. And one of the reasons is because of the swamp fox. The swamp fox received that name. Americans have been defeated at Camden, and the British were having difficulty controlling the South. One of the most famous rebel guerrilla leaders was Francis Marion. And again, the reason he was called the swamp fox is because he led cunning attacks from his base in the swamps. Marion's men were able to cut the British supply line that led inland from Charleston, so he was able to keep them at bay because of the guerrilla tactics and cutting off the supply lines. Washington put Nathaniel Greene in charge of the Southern Army. Greene was one of Washington's best generals, and eventually, the January 1781, the Battle of Cowpens, is going to be a victory for the Americans. He sent part of his army and confronted Cornwallis, and this battle is the first battle that they're going to win. It's a formal linear battle, so they're not using guerrilla tactics. They're actually fighting the Napoleonic method, where you line up and you fire at each other in open field. Cornwallis's main army now pursued Greene up into the North Carolina. The British still have the advantage in a full-scale battle due to their greater firepower, but the Americans would use their knowledge in the landscape to keep one step ahead of the advancing British. So Cornwallis is never able to get hold of Greene's army, who beat him at the Battle of Cowpens. Cornwallis lost so many of his men at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, which was after Cowpens. He decided to retreat into Wilmington, Kings Mountain, and eventually he's going to head into Virginia. So basically, the Britain Southern strategy has failed because they're unable to control the lands, the countryside. Because of Francis Marion, they were able to keep them at bay. And so this sets up the end of the war. And the question is, how was Cornwallis trapped? Well, he's going to go to Yorktown. Yorktown location is a dead end. There's no escape route by land. The only escape route is by sea, which Cornwallis felt comfortable because they had the largest navy. Positioning the French fleet and American forces, though, are going to trap him. Washington and his French allies trap Cornwallis at Yorktown, while French fleet arrives and cut Cornwallis' escape route and supply line. American captured the British redoubts, which were like the smaller forts outside, and he basically captured those and turns the cannons back onto Cornwallis. And after being bombarded and realizing he's trapped, Cornwallis is going to surrender. After Cornwallis' surrender at the Battle of Yorktown, which was the last major battle, fighting did continue in the South and on the frontier, but there was really no major battles after the Battle of Yorktown. So that's kind of like the last battle of the American Revolution. How in the world were the Americans able to defeat the British? Well, the Americans used their advantage to defeat the larger and better trained British Army. America also had the support of the population who assisted their cause. They really didn't count on the American people stepping up like they did. Turn to page 218. There's a list of things that the Americans advantage over the British. Compare their motivation, support for the war. It also compares the military leadership, communications and supply lines, and American foreign allies and troop strength. So that's on page 218. It kind of shows you how we're able to win the American Revolution. Thank you.